In the heart of a quiet, wind-swept village, surrounded by rolling hills and dense forest, there lay the village of Harrowcroft. The villagers lived simple lives, their days spent farming the land, tending to livestock and gathering by the fire at night to tell tales of their ancestors. But beyond the familiar faces of the village, hidden in the shadows of the forest, there was a secret that was known only to a few and feared by all. The secret was Thomas, a man whose very existence seems to defy nature. Thomas was born on a stormy night, marked by strange omens. His mother Isabel, a kind and wise healer, had dreamt of him long before his birth. In her dreams, she saw a child with twisted limbs and a face that seems to carry the weight of a dark curse. The village elders, upon seeing him for the first time, whispered that he was the result of some ancient evil. Whispers spread quickly across the village that he was no ordinary child, but a creature, something less than human and yet not quite a monster. As Thomas grew, so did the fear surrounding him. The other children ran when they saw him, and even adults spoke in hushed tones, convinced that his very presence was a harbinger of disaster. His mother, heartbroken, hid him from the world, keeping him away from the prying eyes of the villagers, only allowing a selected few to visit. But the whispers could not be silent. The fear grew with each passing years. Thomas learned early that the world would never accept him. His deformities, his twisted limbs, and misshapen face would forever mark him as an outcast. Yet, despite the rejection, he found solace in his mother's love. Isabel loved him unconditionally, though she could not protect him from the dark shadows that followed him, or the rejection of those who feared what they did not understand. The arrival of Dr. Morgan, a wandering physician from the distant city of London, was met with curiosity and skepticism. Dr. Morgan had a reputation for treating strange ailments and diseases that even the most experienced healers could not cure. When he heard rumors of Thomas' condition, he decided to venture into the heart of Harrowcroft to see for himself. Unlike the healers, the villagers were accustomed to Dr. Morgan was a man of reasons and science, driven by an insatiable curiosity to understand the world and the force that shaped it. The villagers, who lived according to the ancient traditions and beliefs, were unsure whether to welcome him or fear him. After all, he had come to study something they believed to be supernatural, a curse, not a medical condition. "Thomas," the villagers whispered, "it's not a man, he is a punishment from the gods." But Dr. Morgan was unworried by these tales. He had traveled the world, encountered strange conditions, and had even come across cases that seemed to defy explanation. He was determined to uncover the truth. Where the others saw a monster, he saw a patient in need of understanding. "I want to help him," Dr. Morgan said firmly when he first spoke to the village elders. "I believe there is a rational explanation for his condition, and I can find it." When he finally approached the edge of the forest where Thomas lived in isolation, the air seemed thick with an eerie stillness. It was as though the forest itself held its breath in anticipation. As Dr. Morgan ventured deeper, the sounds of the forest quieted it. And then, in the distance, he saw him, Thomas, sitting beneath an oak tree, his hands trembling as he broke small twigs into fragments. Thomas looked up at Dr. Morgan, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. His face was half hidden by his long, tangled hair, and his body a twisted, painful mockery of a human form. "I've come to help you," Dr. Morgan said gently, stepping closer. Thomas's lips twisted into a bitter smile. "Help me? No one can help me. I'm what I am." There is nothing more to say. Dr. Morgan smiled back. I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to understand what you are, and if you can, to help you. Thomas looked at the doctor for a long moment before finally speaking. Perhaps, but no one ever tried. They only want me gone. The village fears me, and I'm doomed to live like this, alone and cursed. And thus, their journey began. Thomas's home, a small cottage nestled deep in the forest, was far from the village. It was quiet here, too quiet. The trees stretched up to the sky, their leaves whispering in the wind as though they carried the secrets of the earth itself. The silence was heavy, filled with the weight of solitude, and this isolation Thomas had grown, his deformities reminder of his past. As they sat by the fire, the crackling of the flames the only sound between them, Thomas spoke of his past, of his childhood before the deformities became apparent. He had been a happy, curious child, just like any other, and his mother had loved him deeply, Isabel, known for his skill as a healer, had often sung to him of the old gods and spirits who watched over the world. She had always believed in the goodness of people, in the power of kindness, but that had changed when his father Edward, a mysterious man who had arrived from the far-off mountains, came into their lives. The villagers whispered that Edward was no ordinary man, that he came from a cursed bloodline, a bloodline tainted by something darker than death. Thomas' voices shook as he spoke. They said my father was cursed, that his blood carried the mark of something evil, and that his union with my mother was a mistake. He paused, his eyes darkening as the memories resurfaced. I was born with this deformity. The villagers said I was the result of the dark pact, a curse passed down through my father's blood. They cast me out, and my mother could not protect me from their judgment. Dr. Morgan listened quietly, his eyes narrowing in thought. There was more to Thomas' story than mere physical deformities. Something ancient, something sinister seems to be at work here. You are not a monster, Thomas, Dr. Morgan said softly, his voice filled with compassion. You are a man and believe that this curse, whatever it is, can be understood and treated. Thomas shook his head, a bitter smile on his face. Perhaps, but it has been with me my entire life. I don't know how to escape it. Dr. Morgan sat in silence for a moment. There was something more at play here than just physical deformities. Thomas was a man bound by a legacy carried the weight of darkness. As they passed, Dr. Morgan spent more time with Thomas, learning about his life, his isolation, and the deep sense of hopelessness that weighed on him. But something was wrong. The air around them seemed to grow heavier each day, and the once peaceful forest had taken on darker, more oppressive presence. It started with a whisper, a soft murmur on the wind, like voices from another world. At first, Dr. Morgan thought it was just a rustling of leaves, but as time passed, the whispers grew louder. It wasn't just the wind, it was as the very air was alive with something unseen. One evening, as Dr. Morgan sat by fire, deep in thought, a figure emerged from the shadows. She was tall, gaunt, and her eyes gleamed with an unsettling light. Her face was pale, drawn, and she seemed to shimmer with an unnatural aura. "I'm Eliza, the spirit of the forest," she said, in a voice that sent chills down Dr. Morgan's spine. "I've been watching you, Doctor." Dr. Morgan stood, startled but unafraid. "Why are you here?" Eliza's eyes narrowed, a faint smile playing on her lips. "You think you understand what are you dealing with, but you know nothing of the forces at play here. Thomas is not simply cursed by his bloodline. He is the child of something far older, far darker. His blood carries the mark of an ancient evil, and it's awakening." Dr. Morgan felt a shiver of dread. What do you mean? Eliza's eyes gleamed with a terrible knowledge. You are meddling with forces beyond your understanding. His blood is the key. The demon that cursed him will rise again, and when it does, it will consume you all. The air grew thick with that ominous energy. Eliza disappeared into shadows, leaving Dr. Morgan with gnawing sense of dread. The battle for Thomas's soul had only just begun. The more Dr. Morgan learned about Thomas, the more he had begun to uncover the truth behind the curse. The whispers in the forest grew louder. The feeling of being watched became undeniable. Dr. Morgan could sense that there was something much darker at play, something ancient that had cursed Thomas' family for generations. One night, Eliza returned, her form shimmering like a mirage. She was no longer a stranger, but a part of the dark forces surrounding Thomas. "The bloodline is cursed," she said cryptically. "You must stop him before it's too late." Dr. Morgan understood now this was no ordinary deformity. This was born of a dark, ancient curse, and the demon within him was waiting to awaken. The final moment, Dr. Morgan gathered the villagers, including Thomas, around the old oak tree. Together they performed a ritual, invoking the gods of the earth, the forces of nature. As they chanted, the ground trembled, and a dark figure emerged from the earth. It was Thomas's father, Edward, the demon that had haunted his bloodline. The battle was fierce, but Thomas found it strange to fight the demon within him. With a final, desperate blow, he pierced the demon's heart, and it crumbled into the dust. The dark figure of Edward, Thomas' father, rose from the earth with a terrifying force, towering above them all. The villagers recoiled in fear as the shadowy form, looped in fire and smoke, screeched out in fury. It was no longer a man, but a demon, a manifestation of pure evil, one that had haunted Thomas' bloodline for generations. The ground shook violently as the demon's hollow eyes locked onto Thomas. It grinned with sinister delight, recognizing in Thomas an twisted reflection of its own dark legacy. "You are mine," the demon growled, its voice as a thunder, as a storm that had marked Thomas' birth. "You can never escape your true nature. You are my son, cursed by blood." Thomas, weakened by the years of torment and isolation, felt the weight of the demon's words. He had always believed he was nothing but a monster, a cursed child doomed to live in fear, but now, in this moment of truth, something inside him shifted. He remembered his mother's love, the compassion she had shown him, and the strength she had always believed he possessed. With renewed determination, Thomas grabbed the sacred spear that had been prepared for this moment. He lunged forward, his body trembling with the effort, and plunged the spear into the demon's chest. The demon screamed, its form writhed in agony as the sacred weapon's power surged through it. It howled in pain as the curse that had bound Thomas' soul for so long finally began to unravel. The demon's body exploded into shadows, leaving only the sense of smoke and burnt earth in the air. The battle was over. Thomas fell to his knees, drained but victorious. He had broken free from the curse that had haunted his family for generations. In the weeks that followed, the village of Harrowcroft began to heal. The one feared figure of Thomas was no longer an outcast. Instead, he became a symbol of hope and redemption. The villagers who had once feared him now came to him for guidance, seeing in him not a monster they had once imagined, but a man who had conquered his darkest fears and emerged stronger. Dr. Morgan, having witnessed Thomas' transformation, knew his work here was complete. The curse had been broken, the demon vanquished, and Thomas had found peace. Before leaving Harrowcroft, Dr. Morgan shared one last moment with Thomas. "You've done it, Thomas," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "You freed yourself and your people. As the sun set over the village, Thomas stood tall, no longer bound of fear or the shadows of his past. He had become a man who had freed himself from the curse and a hero to those who had once shunned him.